in the wrong directory, so we'll not do that. So I'm going to cd repo cd. Let's do a make dir meetup, and now I'm going to call the CLI new, and then my SW app. Great. So I've got the latest version of the CLI here. If you notice, it went really, really fast. It no longer does all the npm install on its own. So while I'm talking here, I'm going to go ahead and npm install and go ahead and kick that off. It just generated out a standard app for us. Good starting point. Really not a whole lot to it. After this is done generating, what we're going to do is we're just going to serve up the app real quick and take a look at it. And then after that, we're going to start implementing the service worker. So this is where we want to fast forward in the video, right? Yeah. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about what steps we're going to have to do. The first thing we're going to have to do is actually add some stuff to the index.html. Okay, so we actually have to add some code to the index.html to let it know, hey, we want to do our registration. If we don't do the registration there, it's not going to get picked up. It's going to go ahead and pull in our Serviceworker.js file. While this is doing that, let me pull this up over here. So I am going to open from repo and meetup service worker open. Excellent. So now all right, view. Gonna have to wait for this to get done.
One quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the data encrypted in the browser? Is the cache data encrypted? Or how secure is that?
That's a good question.
So it's all over HTTPS. The information, at least during transfer, is going to be sure.
Yeah, but
I am not sure. That might be a user agent thing.
if somebody gets hooked to that browser, that they can get out.
Yeah. So my guess is secure, but that's something you probably do.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, John.
Is there a best practice? Obviously, if you're in a dev environment, you wouldn't want to be caching all your JS files, or whatever. Is there a best practice to say, oh, if I'm in prod, don't run in dev, don't run the service worker. Prod do? Like, is there a best way to do that?
There actually there are some dev tools for service workers. I think they may be integrated in your Chrome by default now. Okay, it's not an add-on you can get. And it allows you to control stuff.
Jesse, if you pop up a Chrome while we're looking at that?
Because it's
Yeah.
running constantly, right? So, like, I imagine that you have to.
Not quite actually. There's in that idle cycle, you'll notice there's a terminate option.
Okay.
So user agents can choose when to have them running or not. And they will terminate
Oh,
when they battery on
actually-
devices that need
Okay.
fine. So they're not always running. They're running when necessary.
Here we go.
They can be started and activated.
Okay.
And
So
there's a whole life cycle involved. Yeah. But you have to be aware of it because they're not always going to be
So-
if they're offline. There's a moment when they may just go.
Okay.
And that could be a small amount of time. So maybe the possible.
So in this case here, we've got our application tab. Let me go ahead and switch this to a side-by-side. Let's see here. Toggle it to the right side. So here I've got my application tab. Also network tab, I'm not offline, everything's good there. So I go to my application, I can see my service workers. Here I can either bring those offline. I can do a few different things so that they're not firing and doing a bunch of stuff locally. So I can work on my development stuff. Also, typically here we're not caching all the files, all the JavaScript files. We're going to be caching the ones in the dist folder. So you're absolutely right. When it's going to be caching those, it's going to be from the dist folder, and they're going to be a build, prod version of those, right? Versus when I'm debugging and whatnot, I'm going to want to turn that stuff off and really work from where the service workers are not online. So even though they've been loaded, we basically want to deactivate them and leave them off. And I believe that's what we can do here with either the offline or the bypass for network. One of those two is going to turn those off.
I think it's the bypass.
Is it? All right. Oh, do we just lock? It is stuck. It hadn't really made much progress there.
waiting, can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So a lot of these things obviously can be done without service workers, right? So what cannot be done without a service worker?
Well, if you want to have these be a man-in-the-middle sort of proxy, and you don't want to actually develop all the framework to make this happen, because the onus would then be on you, right, to make that happen. Far easier to go ahead and take advantage of this, and this is really a standard going forward. And I think that if you went to go do it on your own, you're really missing the boat. Basically now you're going to have to build and maintain however you're going to make this one-off version work, right? Versus take advantage of a pre-existing web standard that's continuing to evolve and add features. So that's what I would caution you with. Again, every project's got different requirements and boundaries, and maybe in yours it has to be that way. But
You need Safari.
yeah, exactly. If you had to have it in Safari, then you would have to either roll something yourself or just say, hey, look, we're not going to do offline first, and we're going to have it work just like a standard app.
In Safari, when you're offline, you can use app cache, which is a really nasty old API that's been deprecated. But that's really your only other option if you want to be offline and have that other than a down page. And the down page is not your down page; it's the default down page. With a Safari on offline, it's basically a white screen. So if you want to do offline, the only real option is to cache, which is pretty nasty. It doesn't work very well.
All right, let me bring up a couple tool windows here. So in our case here, since we've got everything up and loaded, we're going to go ahead and serve up our app. Okay, and so there's our app now. So everything's great. All I've done now, we haven't done any service worker. This is very standard, and we know this because as soon as I come over here and say I want offline mode, and I refresh, boom, we have no internet connection, and this is your standard. Out of the gate, this is the best that you're going to get, right? So how do we make this enabled for a service worker? So it's actually pretty simple. So like I said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a script tag, and we're going to register a service worker, okay? So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to grab this little script right here. We'll blow it up so you can see it. It'll be bigger. And now I'm going to go find in my source, in my index HTML, right here, I believe before the end of the body. I'm going to go ahead and add this. So you've already seen this code, right? This is in the presentation earlier. If service worker exists in Navigator, then go ahead and call Navigator service worker register with service worker JAS. But we don't have that file. Okay, so let's go fix that real quick. So I'm just going to copy this here, and I'm going to come over to my source folder. So it's at the same level as my index, and I'm going to say new JavaScript file. I'm going to paste that service worker. Great. Ta-da! So I've got my standard little message here that I created this. Nothing in it, right? Fantastic. Now what I need to do is I need to go over here to my Angular CLI, and I need to tell it that this service worker file is part of the assets. Otherwise, what's going to happen is when I do my build for this, it won't be in the dist folder. It will not include it, and that will be a problem because it'll go to look for it, and I'll get a 404 silently, and it'll log something to the console, and I'll be in confusion of why it's not caching. So I'll go ahead and add this here, .js. I've got my comma. That all looks good. Great. So now I've added it there. The service worker should now be installed. So if I come back over here to this, and let's go to put ourselves back in online mode, and I want to look at the application here. So you see, there's no service workers, right? So, oh, look at that. We now have a service worker. So it's on localhost 4200. I'm not going to make that, yeah, there we go, a little bit bigger. So localhost 4200. I have a service worker, but it doesn't have any source, and it's probably because there's nothing in there, is why it's complaining. So we'll come back and take a look at that in a second. So right now it's the service worker's loaded. We have it there, but it's not doing anything. So it's really not so useful at this point, right? So let's see here. Next thing we want to do is we're going to go ahead and do a prod build, okay? And so I'm going to pull up, I'm going to go ahead and kill this for right now, and I'm going to do a ng build -- prod. Okay, so that's going to go ahead and kick off my build here. And what I should expect to see when it's done is I'll have a dist folder up here, and that's interesting. In main,
Which version seal it?
all right.
What version is the one?
This is the latest and greatest. I just did this last night. I don't.
Was it actually released or was it a
It's 125, 124.
I'm not sure. Let's do this. We're going to go through a couple of the other.
1 to 3.
We're going to go through a couple of the other steps, and then we're going to pull up the other project where this is at, and then we'll be able to see it fully in action. I told you I had a backup plan. So in our case here, I'm going to do an npm install globally of live. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Install. I want to save in dev here sw-precache. So again, this is a Google maintained library that makes doing this precache really, really easy. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. That's going to be in my dev dependencies. And then I'm going to add this little script over here. Let's see here. And I'm going to add this to my package JSON. And we'll see this in just a second. So I'm going to add this to my script section. So this is available to me. So I'm adding a new command called sw for service worker. It's going to call service worker precache with the root of dist and a config pointing to the precache config JS. One of the things I need to do as well for this to work is I need to go ahead and add this file. I'm going to add it to the root of the project this time. Remember last time I added it to the root of the project or of the actual source for it, and so we added it to the source file. So I'm going to paste this in here for the config. Oh, I didn't specify JavaScript, did I? JavaScript, there we go. Excellent. Yep. And I am going to come back over here, and I'm going to go ahead and grab our little config, and we'll talk through this really quick about what it does. So in this case here, I'm doing a module exports, and it's basically got 4 properties to it. So one
Just
is,
a quick note, you're going to want to rename that file to have a JS extension.
oh, it doesn't have, yeah, good point. Well, we're going to go across to the other project anyway that doesn't have that error. .js, great. So in this case here, we have a navigate fallback. That says if there's any URL that we don't expect, then go ahead and just fall back to index.html and allow Angular to pick it up, and we don't have to worry about it. This is actually how Angular does it as well, so it's pretty common for us. We want to do a strip prefix of dist. We don't want to add the dist folder to any of our prefixes. We want to make sure that that's not included anywhere. We also say the root is dist, so that again, it knows this is where the files are located at. It can go get them. And then we're doing our file globs here. So we're grabbing from the dist folder, index.html, all the JavaScript and all the CSS. If there's other stuff that we want to have cached, here's our opportunity. We can go ahead and add them in here. And so this allows us to configure it. All right, here. So then I'm now going to run our new command that we just created. So I'm going to go npm run our service worker command. Oh, the dist. So in this case here, what happened? So since the build failed, there are no dist files to work with, okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a little smoke and mirrors, and we're going to switch projects to the one that is all the same configuration but works. So not quite sure what the problem with that one is, But so here you can see I've got my dist folder in here, and now I can go ahead and run npm run sw. So it's going to take what's in my dist folder, and it is going to copy my service worker out of my source here. And again, service worker is blank. There's nothing in it, right? But over here in my dist folder, you can see I've got service worker, and now this has a bunch of code in it. Now, I don't know about you, but it just saved me 260 lines of code that I didn't have to write myself, and it's handling the caching for it. And all I did was do some glob matching in a config file and run my command. That seems pretty easy to me, and a lot easier than, you know, doing it by hand or whatever way I could possibly come up with. All right, so that all looks pretty good. Well, how do I run it? It's now in the dist folder. All right, well, the command here is real simple. I want to install globally live server. So live server makes it really simple to go ahead and serve up these files out of the dist folder, and it's automatically will pick up changes and whatnot as we compile it. So this gives me a really good chance to now take a look at this service worker in action and what is it doing. All right, here. So my next deal I need to do, I actually need to copy one more command over, and that is for the live server. And so I'm going to go back down here to my package JSON, and oh, it's already in there. Oh, my bad. So again, this was already pre-configured. We'll just cover this really quick. So we have static serve in here. So we're going to change the directory to the dist, and we're going to call live server. We're setting our port, setting our host, and our entry file is index.html. Really simple, right? So in this case now, I'm going to run. Do I have an extra comma? Yeah, I do. All right, and then we'll give this a shot here. npm run static serve. Excellent. So I was worried if we'd shut down the old server on 4200. It wasn't quite clear in my head, but obviously we did, or 4200 wouldn't be available. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the tools, and we can see now, in this case, since we do have source, here it is. I can actually click on it. I can see what that source is. I believe I can actually put a debug point on it, so I can step into this as I'm making requests. I've got ways that I can figure this out really, really simple, what's going on, in case we start to have some problems. But in this case here, I can go ahead and refresh it. My app keeps coming up. Now here's the real test. Let's go ahead and go offline. Okay, and let's just clear these out. So we're 100% offline. We have no internet connection to this instance of the browser right now, and yet it came up. Okay, so from the user's experience, we went with an offline first. All the stuff that it needed was cached and available, and we were good to go. So what's really interesting about this as well is then I close the browser, and I don't need that anymore. I can just terminate that. Excellent. I open up a new window over here, and I go local 4200, and it's still there. And actually my, oh, wow, that wasn't really fair. Let's do this again.
Take the network off.
New window, exactly. I'm going to go ahead and turn the network off and just show what happens here. Now I'm going to go to local 4200. It's still there. So my point here is it's still registered. It didn't just go away. Even though I terminated Chrome in that Chrome instance there, that service worker is still registered. So even though the user, let's say it's a progressive web app, when they close it down on their device, when they click that icon to pull it back up, the service worker is still there. It fires back up and running and go. Pardon me?
Can it share across browsers? Suppose if I open up some other browser, will it still run?
Like, are you talking about
Yeah.
Firefox?
No, you have to install it in Firefox. You can share across different browser tabs and instances
Yeah.
Tabs. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a really good question.
You open up Firefox and then start.
Firefox is a whole own thing, so you have to install it in Firefox.
So that's a really good question. I'm going to go ahead and repeat it so I can get it on the video. So the question here is if I take this and I run it on Chrome and then I run it on Firefox, is it going to share the cache data across them? And the answer is no. We don't believe that that's actually going to work for you. But what we do know is that if I open up a second tab here, it's available. I can go ahead and turn off the network here. I can go local 4200 and bam. So it is sharing cache across tabs. So that's definitely there. Yeah, go ahead.
So under the covers, is this just using browser cache?
It's actually using the cache API that we were talking about earlier. You can look up on the MDN. Each browser may have a different way of implementing that, but they all have a standard API that they're following.
Does that API using browser cache, or is it creating a new area to store the data?
It should be a new area to store the data, and I believe the reason why is service workers are background. They're basically a background pair within the context of the browser, so that's actually the browser itself. So they're actually caching in its own context, its own memory space. So
And it's not the browser.
it is not. And technically speaking, the browser cache here should actually still be active as well. So if the request you got back and you cached in Service Worker was a 302, then the browser is going to notice that and it's going to cache this up as well. So they should actually still be valid. They should all be valid.
Okay, Shannon, go ahead.
Cache is done?
Say again?
If you clear your cache is done, or is it part of something else?
So let's say if I turn on Cache Killer or something like that.
Just clear your cache.
So in my case here, Cache Killer's on. It's still there. So I don't believe it's dealing with the same cache.
Sure, I mean like if you clear, I meant like cookies and local storage and all that kind of stuff.
That's what Cache Killer would be doing, would be killing that. So it looks like it's not actually using the default browser cache. It's going off and using, through the Cache API, it's creating up a separate data store for that. So,
You may actually be able to go into application in the application tab. This stuff may actually be stored in IndexedDB. I think it may depend a little bit on how the browser implements it. But if you take a look at IndexedDB, you may actually be able to find cache information there. No, okay. Under cache, take a look at cache store. A little lower down. There you go.
gotcha.
So yes, it's definitely a separate storage.
So yeah, stored here in the cache storage under our long name here. All right. So hey, this is great. We're able to now do an offline app. You can see it loads super, super fast. In fact, it's so fast I'm not able to see any of it even flash or make any difference. You know, so it's really, really nice. So that's great, but that's just offline mode. So what else can we do? How can I get some performance improvements out of this that my clients could really appreciate? So let's talk about that a little bit, and that's where sw-toolbox comes in. So this is the second part here. This is another library that's maintained by Google, and this is extending and giving you more features that you can go after that are pretty cool. So imagine this. In your service worker file, you can declare express style routes and request handling. And we're going to take a look at that and what you can do there. You can add policies like middleware. Network first, cache first, etc. Let's see here. We've got caching configuration. We'll take a look at some examples of this. And also works with the Service Worker Precache library. So let's take a look at what this looks like. I'm going to go ahead and import a script called sw-toolbox. And with toolbox, if you look at this here, toolbox.router.get matching on star. That looks just like what I'd be writing in for an express route. In fact, when I first looked at this, it's like, oh, I add this to my node code. This is no, this is not awesome for that. This is in my service worker. This is awesome because this is happening on the client, and now I've got express-like routes here. And so from that on this get call here, now I've got the request values and options, and now I can make a call here to network first. So it'll actually go ahead and make a call to network first. And if it fails, my second one here is I'm going to go ahead and return caches match on the offline, okay, if it fails. Okay. Let me see if I have some other notes on that really quick.
So network first is one of the policies. You have cache first, network first,
Gotcha.
fastest, and a few others.
Gotcha. Yeah, so these are some of the policies, different things I can do. Network first versus cache first versus fastest. So in this case here, this is one I really like. Let's say I'm going and getting comments. So I'm watching on the router get calls, and I call toolbox fastest. It's actually going to attempt to get it from cache and the network simultaneously. And whoever wins gets delivered to the client. And let's say network should be probably slower in most cases, right? It'll update the cache. So I don't even have to bother with updating the cache and doing the little fetch and cache routine that we were doing earlier. Okay. I can set notice here, I can set we talked about doing some config. My network timeout seconds, 5 seconds. My cache, my name is comments, max age seconds. So let me give you an example where we're using this. So we have an application that does street sweeping alerts, okay? And so we're getting data from a third-party source on, for this latitude and longitude, when are they going to be sweeping again next? What's nearby and where are they going to be sweeping at? And then we're like, well, let's make this thing smart. Let's have it search a little bit around there too so we get more than just one. Well, that can get kind of slow because the server data isn't coming down at lightning speeds. So what we start to do is cache this because often they're pulling up the same data or near data. They'll click over here and we already have this route cached and all we really need is this one or that one. And we can start using something like fastest to go out and to get it from cache. Or we can do cache first if we want to. That might be another strategy depending on how we want it to respond. So by doing that, we're actually able to reduce the call times dramatically and improve the performance for the user. So again, why do this versus roll my own? Because in this case here, I'm going to get continued improvements out of utility things like this, libraries that are maintained by organizations like Google that are going to make my life easier and the experience for my users better. So references here. Let's see. We got a lot of this from the developers google.com site. So if you start getting here on the service workers, some great resources in here. Again, you don't have to write any of these down. We'll post this up so you can get to it. The demo that I just gave you on how to make my app offline came from this Corley Ryland blog here. There's a great article. He covers a couple other little points in there. And there's some more details that you might want to garner from that would be useful. Designing offline first web apps. This is a great article here about understanding the offline first concept and helping you get your head wrapped around it and maybe what some of those best practices are. And the last two here are on the pre-cache library and the toolbox library. So here's the links to go out and get those and be able to bring them down and read up on the documentation. If you need additional help on it, you can reach out to Pluralsight. There's some great Pluralsight videos out there. And lastly, if you're still struggling and you need some help, give us a call. Be happy to sit down with you and take a look at what you're attempting to do and see if we wouldn't be able to help you figure out a solution for it. So with that, any closing questions? Yep, go ahead.
I discussed on the meetup about the skill pad thing. I was wondering if I could have 5 minutes.
Absolutely, yep, absolutely. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So besides the caching, which we'll take a look at, is there anything else useful we can do with this?
So those are some of the things that we talked about earlier. We could be doing web push notifications. We could be doing background syncs. Some of the things that are coming is the location-based services or geofencing. Also periodic sync. They give you a little bit more control over that. And based on what we're seeing with this is that it feels like it's going to continue to grow. And there's going to be more and more features that we can do with it. This is just like the tip of the iceberg of what's possible here. Go ahead, Dave.
To do the syncing, are you using some syncing library? Or?
Yeah, it's there's an API for that for the background sync, and so what it allows you to do is you can when you do save, you'd actually have the service worker check to see if it's in offline mode. And if it is, it's just saving it locally, and when it comes back online, it's going to make that call.
one of the major save local options is IndexedDB. So a lot of people are just saving IndexedDB, and everything's saved in IndexedDB. And then whenever you have the opportunity to sync, you can sync to the server when you get back online.
Excellent. Let's actually Shannon, I think, was next. Go ahead, Shannon.
You mentioned there was using promises. Is there any way, or has anyone tried to use observables with it? You like integrate RxJS or something to?
You might be able to do that. I believe at this point you'd probably have to take your promises and convert them to observables before every thing. But at this point, they're promisey at least versus callbacks. You know what? Good chance we'll probably start to see something at some point, maybe move toward observables. But we'll see.
You can always turn in a promise into observable.
Yeah.
You do want to be careful with how much you're loading into your service worker though. Like you want to keep your service worker pretty small. So loading the entire observable library would be tree shaking.
Yeah, you want to keep, like anything else, if you load it up, this is going to, potentially you can go from being a really great thing for a user to being a really bad thing for a user. Hey, I'm going to cache my entire database. It's really weird. This thing won't perform very well. So, I believe you were next.
What about if maybe your network is just really slow, it's not unavailable, does the library kind of take care of that?
I believe the toolbox stuff is the route that I would look at. I would start to look at network first, cache first, fastest, some of those, and figure out based off of your use case and what you want it to do, what's going to perform best for you. Every situation is going to be a little different. So anytime you're on a slow connection, you may decide, hey, on a slow connection, we just want it to time out after a certain amount of time and just display the offline and be done. And just say, hey, you know what, this is too big, for the bandwidth that you have. Or I want to be able to get it all from cache. You're going to decide what that strategy looks like and what's going to work best for you.
You might want to do some searches for Serviceworker and Li-Fi. It's kind of a word that comes up a lot when you're looking into Serviceworkers is Li-Fi, because it's when your phone acts like it's online, but really it's not, or it just has such a horribly slow connection that you can't really use it. So, if you do those searches, you'll
Otherwise
find a
known
lot
as AT&T 3-bar.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so you'll find a lot of resources where they have to answer your question if you start searching that kind of stuff.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Can you modify the request within the service?
Yes, I believe you can actually modify the request because you have the event request object, and you can go in, make modifications, do what you want to do to it. And so you could have it based off of various conditions, Li-Fi, offline, different things that you want to do. You could modify that request potentially, and that would all be through that fetch API. To answer your question? Good. John, go ahead.
It's gonna be a rabbit hole, but I think all the examples you gave were mainly about get requests. How would you handle say I'm offline and I make 20 post requests to edit or put requests to edit, I don't know, comment or something. How do I handle that?
Good question. So that would be
and replay them or something.
So the question here is on offline data posting instead of just getting. And so in that case here again, that is the background sync. And I believe what it's doing, it's most likely what I believe it's doing is it's doing some sort of queued request, and it's got that data saved off locally, and then it's going to go back and replay those actions back and do its best to handle that. You may have to do some custom stuff with that. What'd you say, Jeff?
You can control that too. Like if you want to intercept all the posts and put them in local storage and do a different kind of whatever your syncing methodology.
Yeah, that's a great point. You could take the toolbox there and using your express style routes, take all the posts and do whatever you want with them. You really do have a lot of freedom to make decisions here without having to write a lot of code.
But then presumably your server code has to deal with any
It's
kind
up
of
to you.
integrity type issues of somebody else has already updated.
Wholly different, totally, yeah. That problem's not going to go away. Yeah. So the question there is that if we have any sort of data sync conflicts or whatnot, Serviceworkers is not going to solve that for you. You're going to have some sort of strategy in place to handle that and then resolve that.
So the syncing happens even if the browser is closed?
I believe actually in this case, no, because the service worker at that point is terminated. It's actually when you bring it back up, it's going to then attempt to go ahead and sync. So the question was around is if it's going to attempt to do the background sync even when the browser is closed. No, because at that point, my understanding is the service worker is terminated. It's not running. When we pull it back up, it's like, hey, activate. And then it's going to attempt to kick that stuff off.
But you don't need your website or the tab open. The browser being open is
Gotcha.
That background sync.
That's a good point. Yeah, because that service worker, even if
Every registered service worker is always running once it's registered.
yeah,
When you bring the browser up, they'll all start.
new
Running
window.
on a phone, if it would still be running even if you weren't in active tab. Or active.
Right.
So if we look here, I haven't.
Utility trigger everything that might have killed it.
It actually, I'm not sure that's because it's no longer the service worker is no longer running. So what I wanted to see here is if that's actually true, and I'm not sure if it's just running in the background and not picking it up, but it does pick it up once it's launched. So it may just be in a back.
Try one thing. New tab, and then make sure you have show all, because it might not be showing it if you're not on the actual site. So
Oh.
New tab, kill your other one, and then go back to the service thing and say show all. There.
Ah,
So you view.
gotcha. So yep, that's a good point. Oh look, I got one with Twitter. Look at all this stuff. I got all these service workers running.
It's getting beginning.
All right, great. Any other questions?
So you registered it once, you close the tab, it's still working, how do you kill it completely?
You can delete it from the tool.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I can come up here, the safer way to do this is take it off show all, and I'm going to go to my site that I'm on, and I can go ahead and take my service worker now, and I can unregister it.
Can
Okay.
you do it from your code or something?
I believe you might be able to pass a terminate message to it, but
I think there might be a way of registering it. Actually, I didn't do that.
yeah, I'm not. That's a good question. I bet the MDN has something on that for you.
Yeah, because I mean, as soon as you have presumably hundreds or thousands of apps running,
Yeah, so if I go ahead and unregister this guy now and put myself in an offline mode and I do a refresh, we're back to the dinosaur. So it's now been unregistered. It's no longer there. So if I want to bring this back on, I would need to get back into a network connection where I can refresh. I can get now a network version of it, go back offline, refresh, and bam, it's there. So one of the things I'll caution you on this is, so I'm developing an app. Things are going great. I'm cruising. Switch to app B. I'm running it. Everything, it's still on app A. Service worker still running. It's caching. And so even though I'm running, I'm running B and it's got a network connection, it's still caching the files from A, especially if I'm developing on localhost like 4200. So be careful about that. If you're going between apps, you're going to need to probably, and they're both using service workers to cache, you're going to need to unregister and then run it with the new one so it can pull those cache files in and go. The what now?
You can use different ports.
Or different ports. Yep, lots of different ways to get around it. But
is that a way to communicate between service worker?
no, it's not communication between it two. It's just saying that service worker is still there. It's still registered. Then it says, hey, you told me on 4200, these are the cache files you want. I don't even need to go to the server to go get them, even though I have a network connection. The service worker hasn't been updated, so I'm going to assume that everything's still the same. So that's basically the problem you run into. So it's a little gotcha that can surprise you a little bit.
So, but wouldn't you have a different service worker for every app you have?
Yes, but again, if you install a service worker on app A and app B, and they're both on localhost 4200, and you're switching back and forth, whichever one you actually ran the command on for SW precache, that's the one it's gonna use, because that's the one that the last got registered and it pulled that in.
If you go back to the tools, there's actually another option you can use to solve that scenario.
Tools.
Application,
Okay.
servers, update and reload. If you enable that, it'll always keep it up to date. So if you actually are working on multiple sites, you got to kind of flip back and forth.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's a great one. So if we are working on site A and site B with everything's the same, then go ahead and do the update on reload, and it'll check that for you. Probably save you some serious time. All right, yeah, go ahead.
It's more of a going down the road. So once this scales out, have you put any thought into Now you have lots of people using this, and an end user has 10 or 15 tabs open, and they're all using their own service workers. What that does to the person's machine is now you have a lot of threads running, trying to keep things in sync. And you might have just, the culmination of that now
Sure.
causes their workstation to have a lot of problems.
So the question is around having all these service workers running in multiple tabs and with multiple different service workers. A couple of things. One, any tabs that are with the same site are all going to share the same data, the same cache, right? So there, you're not so much of a problem there as long as you're being reasonable about what you're caching.
I'm talking about 15 different unique websites. You only
Sure.
have
And I'm actually covering each part for you here real quick. So, because there are multiple scenarios here. One is each app is going to use a common cache for that app.
Yeah.
And as long as we're reasonable. So even if I only have one app location open over multiple tabs, but I'm, let's say I'm caching 5 gigs worth of data, now I'm causing problems for my user. So, but not a best practice. Please don't do that. You're now creating a negative experience. I think as long as we're all reasonable and we're keeping all of these fairly small, that it shouldn't really impact it. But again, one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch. And it could be pretty tough to figure out who's causing the problem, as an end user. So yeah, it's our responsibility to kind of figure that out.
Chrome will probably stomp down certain bad behaviors as well.
We would hope
I
that,
mean,
yeah.
Like that's a browser problem here, right?
Yeah, so the user agent has the ability to terminate whenever it feels like it's necessary.
Mhm.
So if you've got 15 different tabs open all of your own service workers, and you're activating one or two of them at a time, the other ones can be killed if they're causing problems for any reason in the browser is able to determine when to kill and terminate a service worker. And if you go back to those tabs, it'll just bring right back up for you, and then it goes back to the side of
And that'll be a problem
for user agent.
Firefox or Chrome.
Exactly. Or if you're running on a mobile device and there's some other kind of user agent working, it's the user agent's problem to resolve that.
That's the bigger problem because you have to worry about battery.
Exactly.
All right, sounds great.